I'm married to a wonderful man. As of last year, we had our first child together. However, I used to be married to another man who turned out to be not a very good person. We also had a child together. My current husband has been incredibly kind to her and has treated her as his own since they met when she was 4. I'm just incredibly lucky to have such a great guy. We've always been very open and honest with each other. However, he is not and never has been the type to indulge in gossip. So in this case, I knew it wasn't him hiding information from me, but more so him forgetting to tell me or giving me a warning in advance. I don't blame him, but I certainly give him a hard time occasionally because of it. Anyway, on to the story. His side of the family likes to do a lot of gatherings for not only holidays but for people's birthdays, sports games, any reason they could think of to celebrate. They always invited us, but we didn't always go. The few times we went, it was fine. No issues, and I got along with a lot of his relatives. I was nervous about bringing my daughter with me, not wanting them to judge me or treat me differently. But to my relief, they all welcomed her with open arms, just as my husband did. She had so many kids to play with, and his parents adored her. Everything went well. So when they invited us to another barbecue, we made plans to go, and my daughter would be going with us. It was at his parents' house, and a lot of people were already there when we showed up. We made our way to the backyard, and my daughter immediately ran off to go swimming with the other kids. Everyone was talking when someone showed up whom I hadn't met before. We'd been to a few of these parties, but we also missed some of them, so I had never met this woman before. My husband introduced me to her, saying it was his Aunt Gail. She found a seat by his mom, her sister, and we continued our conversation. She asked a few questions about me, and that was it. After some time, my daughter ran up to me asking for something. Gail looked at me in shock. "That's your kid?" I proudly confirmed and told my daughter to introduce herself. As she normally does, she said her name, her age, and her favorite animal. Gail seemed to have a fake smile on her face as she responded to her, and after a brief back and forth, my daughter ran back off. Gail then asked how long we'd been dating, and I could see that she was trying to do the math in her head. Before I could respond, my husband explained that my daughter was from a previous marriage. Gail eyed me for a while as if I was lying, but it wasn't a lie. If I have to explain any further, I do it similarly to what I did above, without giving much detail. My husband's mom changed the subject and got Gail talking about something else, awkward conversation seemingly averted. When the food was done, I made my daughter's plate and helped the other kids. When they were all settled, I made my own and joined my husband and some others in eating. Again, everyone was doing their own thing, and some time after everyone had eaten, the kids started playing around with some fake swords and water guns. My daughter ran over to me like she wanted to spray me, so I gave her the normal parental look. Parents out there will understand what I mean, just a playful look of "don't you dare." But she also had her equally evil grin, and I knew it was going to happen. So I braced myself as I got splashed with water. I stood up to play with her and made the comment to some parents, "I brought you into this world, little girl. Don't make me take you out of it." She screamed, and I went to chase her. Some people were laughing, and my husband even told her to run. But when I caught her, she tried to play dead, lying still with her tongue sticking out. So my husband went to grab her when she jumped up. He always played around with her like that, and it's one of the reasons we both love him. After a bit of playful back and forth, my husband helped me up, and we went back to the deck, my daughter now preoccupied. As we approached, I noticed Gail had a pretty angry look on her face, while his mom had a look of concern. Her eyes were wide, and she was looking between my husband and Gail. I didn't know what was wrong, and I certainly wasn't going to pretend like it was any of my business. So I just grabbed my drink and watched the kids. His mom started to say something when Gail loudly said, "That's not funny, Sandra." I looked over at her, confused and at a loss for words. "I'm sorry?" His mom touched her knee and tried saying something like, She was just playing around, Gail, but Gail seemed to lose it. She adjusted in her chair. Playing around? Then my husband's dad chimed in from over by the fire pit. She was just joking with her kid, Gail. Let it go. Obviously annoyed with her. Well, it wasn't very funny to me, Gail said, and stormed off inside. I immediately started apologizing profusely. I didn't know what I did, but apparently, I had done something. His mom said it was fine and ran off after her. My husband told me everything was okay, and his father did too. No one would tell me what had set her off and why, but they just tried to assure me that it wasn't my fault. No matter how much they said it, I felt like I really messed up and ruined the night. Apparently, Gail left shortly after that, and everyone else tried to and successfully lifted the mood again. But I was dwelling on it hard. I didn't know what happened or what I did or said. Once we got back home and my daughter was in bed, I finally asked what the heck had happened. My husband said that Gail just gets sensitive around kids, but that made even less sense. I had to push him to tell me more. I feel bad, but I was going to dwell on it forever until I figured out what I had done and how to avoid it in the future. What he told me was not what I was expecting. Apparently, back when my husband was still a child, Gail also had a child. But she was not the best parent. His words, not mine. She did not want the kid, yet she kept it. But over time, she got better at it and seemed to show her love for her daughter. Then one day, there was a lot of talking between his parents that he couldn't hear, and the next thing he knew, Gail was staying with them for a few days until she wasn't. Then he didn't see her for a while. Turns out, Gail's daughter died, but she didn't report it until the day after. That alone caused a lot of suspicion, as anyone would presume. There was a huge court case about it, and eventually, it was ruled an accident. Again, my husband was still very young, so he didn't get to hear about this until he was older. Even then, he didn't probe into it, which was understandable. Apparently, my comment about taking you out set her off. While it was just a saying, and I was just playing around, it really affected her, and I honestly felt horrible for it. I had no idea, and apparently, no one thought it was necessary to bring it up, which I also understood. Hi, meet my Aunt Gail. She lost her kid, so watch what you say. Yeah, there's really no way to bring that up. But apparently, the whole thing caused quite a rift in their family because of the whole situation. Some family members feel like she did it on purpose and should have been charged to the full extent. I got a vague rundown of what happened from my husband and left it at that. But when we found out I was pregnant, and she started acting strange around me, I decided to look into it more myself. I found the articles about it online and at our local library, and let's just say I can definitely see why so many people think there was something more that happened. I don't want to go into full details because I don't want to reveal my family more than I already have, which is also why I called her Gail. It's not her real name. But since learning this, I felt uncomfortable around her. She's made some odd comments and would look at my infant in a way that would make anyone hold them tighter. I know there's really nothing I can do at this point, but it sits in my head, and sometimes I think about it. Thankfully, we only see her maybe twice a year at his parents' house, so we can avoid her for the most part. But having 2 kids now, and knowing that they mean the world to me and my husband, I can't imagine that kind of loss. I hope that she truly is innocent. I have a story about a secret that my family kept for a long time. While I understand why it was kept from me, it's one of those things that, when I found out what happened, hit me hard. My opinion of the people involved obviously changed by the end of it. Someone that I thought was a hero ended up being nothing more than a terrible person. For my entire childhood, I genuinely thought that my dad was a hero. I thought that he was in the military, fighting for my country. I was proud of him, even though I could barely remember what he looked like. I guess I should step back a bit. When I was much younger, my dad was present. I have a couple of photos of my dad with my mom and me. I was the first and only kid that my mom and dad had, I can't even really give many memories of my father because I was only around 5 when he disappeared from my life. Obviously, I didn't understand why he was no longer in my life at first. I just knew that he wasn't there. I do have one memory, though. I remember that it was at night, I was crying, and my dad gave me this tight hug saying something along the lines of, "Sorry, buddy. I'll be back eventually. You'll be good, okay?" The only problem is that I'm not even sure if this memory is real. It's probably not. I think it's just one that I made up for some reason, one that I fabricated in my mind to make sense of my father's absence. To go along with this, my mother told me that my father was in the military and that he had been shipped out and was fighting the bad guys to save the country. When I started to get older and more cognizant, it made sense that he wasn't home because he was a soldier. When he disappeared, it was 2001. I obviously didn't know what happened on September 11th at the time, but as I got older and learned about it, it made sense that he was overseas fighting a war. As I got older, I always made it a point to mention how much of a hero my dad was. I would tell my teachers, my friends, and people I barely spoke to. I would always say that my dad was in another country fighting people who were evil. My mother started the lie, but my family kept it going. They would always go with what she told me. I spent birthdays without my father and holidays without him. It was hard as a little boy. I know I asked my mom numerous times why he wasn't able to come home for at least Christmas, and she would just tell me that he would be home soon, that he couldn't abandon his post. I would ask why he never called or wrote us letters, but she would just say that calls would get really expensive. She then said that he had written me letters and gaslight me into believing that he had sent letters for my birthday last year or a few years ago. She even told me that one of my presents from Christmas was from him. I believed every bit of it. I believed that the military wasn't letting him come home and that he had sent me the letters or presents. She kept this up until I was in my preteens, around 12 years old. When I was 12, things started to not add up. It would have been 2008-ish. I was old enough to watch the news and saw the world and events happening. It hit a point where it didn't make sense why he hadn't come home. My preteen brain hit a point where I wanted to confront my mom and ask her for the truth. So, I did. I confronted her at one point and asked her, "Hey, Mom, you need to tell me the truth about Dad. He's not overseas, he would have come home by now. Where is he?" At this point, my mom had the chance to tell me the truth, but instead, she broke down crying and told me something else. She told me that while my dad was overseas, he had been killed in action. She looked me dead in the eyes and told me that my father had died in 2003, that he was killed over in Iraq, or Afghanistan, or whatever, and that she wanted to tell me but couldn't bring herself to do so. Once again, she told me that my father was a hero, that he was killed defending the country, and that he had died with honor. It's almost sad that I could wish this was actually the truth. But what really happened was not this. I found out the real truth when I turned 20, about 8 years ago. It was the day of my 20th birthday. I had made it to my 20th birthday without my father. My mother had done her best to raise me, but I had to do a lot of growing myself. I had to watch the other boys be taught how to do things by their fathers and wish that I could have that too. But I couldn't, right? Because my father was, according to my mother, killed in action overseas. All of it was so emotionally confusing. I wanted my father to be in my life, but I was also proud of him for his sacrifice. But when I turned 20 and was having dinner with my mother and my grandma, something came up that involved my dad. My grandmother made a comment that confused me. "Well, it's sad what happened, but at least he won't be able to get to you ever again." She said this, and I stared at her in confusion. Then I saw my mom start to have that panicking face she had when she told me he was dead. It was then that it clicked that something was wrong. I wasn't being told something, or someone was lying. I asked my grandma what she meant by that, not even hesitating or giving myself time to think about it. She looked at me with her mouth open, like she'd been caught in something, and then looked at my mom. My mom started crying at this point, and my grandmother apologized, telling her that she thought I knew about the whole thing and that my mother had told me. My mom said we would have a conversation after dinner, but I wasn't really hungry at this point. I could feel the pit in my stomach growing, knowing that they were hiding something. When we got home that night, my grandmother and mother sat me down. At that point, I was told the truth, a truth that I didn't want to hear. Back when I was 4 or 5, when my father left my life, it wasn't because he was shipped overseas to fight terrorism. It was because he was an absolute monster. That night that he went away because he attempted to murder my mother. He likely would have killed me too. For whatever reason, my father snapped that night and, in a drunken rage, stabbed my mother 3 times and left her for dead. I was told that he attacked her because she tried to stop him from beating me, a 5-year-old. He had hit me numerous times that night, apparently knocking me unconscious, and then tried to kill my mother. My grandmother had been there that night and called the police when he was attacking me. It's because of her that my father was stopped. My mother's life was saved, and possibly my life was saved. For the entirety of my childhood, I thought my father was this amazing person, a hero. I told people I was proud of him, that I missed him and loved him. But the entire time, he was actually an attempted murderer who would have likely killed my mother had the police not shown up. The comment that my grandmother made was actually because my father had died in prison recently. He had apparently gone into cardiac arrest and was unable to be revived. My mother had been notified of it a couple of days before they told me about all of this. This was probably the hardest day of my life, to find out that the man I wished had been there every day growing up had almost ended my life. It's been a few years now. I'd like to say that I've moved on from all this, but it's still something that tears at me from time to time. I don't blame my mother for keeping this all from me, but it's still so painful to know that she had lied. I'm sharing this now in hopes of letting some of it go, putting some of it out into the world, and hoping it'll make it a bit easier. To those who knew me growing up, I'm sorry for lying to you about my father. I believed all those lies myself. I thought I was telling you all about this amazing man who was an honest hero when, in fact, he couldn't have been more of a villain. And to my younger self, I wish I could go back and give you a hug to prepare you for the pain you would feel when you're told that your dad is dead, both the first and the second time.